This story gives us the prelude to talk to our good friend Patrick J. Buchanan, political commentator, counselor to presidents, communicator extraordinaire, and columnist. Pat, we welcome you back to America's Forum.
Well, thank you very much. Old Joe Biden didn't sound too forceful there.
Well, this was going to be my first question. You know, I know that there are so many people who lament this question, but I can't help but ask it. You advised him. What would Reagan do? Would Ronald Reagan himself have gone to the Ukraine?
I don't believe so. I was with Reagan from 85 to 87, but let's remember when, for example, they crushed Solidarity in 1981, the Jaruzelski regime in Poland did on the orders of Moscow. Reagan did not do anything exactly. He certainly did not do what some of us recommended, which was put the regime in default on its debts to the United States, which would have caused bankruptcies all across Eastern Europe and destroyed the credit rating of the Soviet Empire, because he was fearful what would happen to the German banks. Basically, what Reagan believed was you don't interfere in the internal empire of the Soviet Union militarily. And what you do is we hold the line because we're going to win this in the long run. We are stronger, and internal contradictions of the Soviet Empire will bring it down. I think that's probably pretty good advice in the Ukraine.
Well, it is interesting to hear that. So from your perspective, Reagan would have taken I guess for lack of a better term, a cautious approach, but one that dealt with the inevitability of freedom. Now, we also know that Reagan warned us that our freedom was one generation away from extinction. When you take a look at the conduct of the Obama administration, which can only be described as confused in dealing with Mr. Putin and the Russians, what advice would you have today for President Obama?
Well, I think the great danger to America's freedom comes from within, not without. Let's assume that Putin marched across southern and eastern Ukraine all the way to Odessa, which is the western border almost of Ukraine, right there on the Black Sea. He would have acquired nothing that Russia did not hold from the time of George Washington's inaugural to the inauguration of George H.W. Bush. It doesn't represent a strategic threat to the United States. So I think that what the United States should do, and what we did during the Cold War, was avoid a major conflict with the Soviet Union, with nuclear-armed Soviet Union, at the same time hold the line in the West and let the internal contradictions of the empire bring it down, which it did. Now, what would I advise President Obama to do? I think, in a way, he's not doing the wrong thing. I think we do not have a military stake in this. We do not have any justification for any kind of military conflict with Russia over Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, or over Crimea. And so those people who are arguing to be sending ships and planes and troops, I'm not with them.
Pat, David Patton here. Would you go so far as to say that some conservatives and some Republicans are being hypocritical on the Ukraine issue in terms of the response that they're advocating? On the one hand, there's some talk that Obama should be more aggressive, the United States should consider having some sort of military activity, perhaps sending arms and so on and so forth, things that would be very threatening to Russia and to Putin potentially. So on the one hand, they're kind of egging him on in that direction, but on the other hand, they're not really willing to put their name to a policy like that could so quickly turn disastrous. How would you evaluate the integrity of the Republican, let's call it mainstream Republican response?
Well, you know, I don't want to talk to people's integrity, but I think that would be absolute folly. Let's say, you know, we saw the Ukrainians did not resist the takeover of Crimea militarily. They had troops down there. Their performance in eastern Ukraine has been appalling. They've surrendered their armored personnel carriers. Their army apparently does not really exist almost. Their economy is a complete basket case. I think to encourage people like this, and even worse, start sending them guns and telling them to use them on the Russians when they could not defeat the Russians and they're liable to provoke a war in which they get slaughtered, that is extraordinarily irresponsible. You know, I was a kid in ROTC marching around with an M1 rifle at Georgetown when the Hungarian Revolution occurred, and Eisenhower did not do anything but send Nixon to that bridge at Andau to see the poor Hungarians pouring out of there. But it was discovered later that the Voice of America may have encouraged these Hungarians to rise up in the expectation we would be there. Now, you don't do that. I mean, my view is you've got to tell them God's honest truth, that, look, fellas, we admire and respect a lot of what you want. We are with you, but we're not going to send folks to fight you, and if you take on the Russians, you're going to lose.
Pat, you reminded us of that in your book, A Republic, Not an Empire. But with about a minute left, I can't resist this question. You said the greatest threat to the United States comes from within. Pat, are you talking about our situation on the borders, or would you just articulate, with the minute remains, what you see as the principal threat to our way of life?
I think that, as I campaigned in 1991, I think there are several of them. One of them is the enormous growth of government power, which is stifling private enterprise and reducing our ability, basically, to innovate and be the strong country we were. We are a country unable to defend its borders, and as Ronald Reagan said, a country that can't defend its borders isn't really a country anymore. I think culturally and socially we have declined. We are not as good a people, I don't believe, as we were in 1960, as our parents' generations were, as the greatest generation was, and we've given away our industry.
Well, Pat, as you said, the titling another one of your books, you've been right from the beginning. You were certainly right 2 decades ago. We thank you for your time. Stay with us. There's more to come on America's Forum.